but they have to go through the pain to get there. But what's really important to understand is that most clients, when they come in, they either don't know what shame is, or if they do know what shame is, they don't think they have any. So there's so much denial around it. They've really lost touch with how much shame is in their life and how much it controls them. So for many people, this is like opening a door that they've slammed shut for years, and it's something in them is totally afraid of doing. So it requires just a lot of sensitivity as counselors to be alert to that, but I'll just say that up front. So one of the things that I do is to start the week by just a couple of possible tools that will help people start to get in touch with it. So this shame inventory is one of them. It's by no means a thorough, complete type of inventory, but it just starts to give them a sense of some of the questions that we're going to be looking into. So I'll let you go take it. Yes.
Yeah, it's a fairly normal day. But most of the days have been
They had done this test 6 months ago, they would have had a totally bigger score. And so they actually see the growth and the healing that's already happened in them, which is very validating and encouraging for them. So what you're going to look at in the week on shame is just as many different ways for people to feel validated. And so where I go next is to define shame, just so that people are all on the same page. Because a lot of people, so here's the most common thing you're going to get. When people hear the word shame, they only think of growing up and hearing you should be ashamed of yourself. And so in their minds, it's ashamed or something that was embarrassing. And so that's not the definition of shame. And so we have to start there. And then the second thing that gets confusing to them, and you have to make a distinction, is what's the difference between shame and guilt? So we'll come to that in just a minute. So what I want to emphasize with clients when we start this is that shame is what we refer to as a core belief. And what a core belief is at the very deepest part of me, this is what I believe is true. I might not even be conscious of it, but I still believe it is true. So anybody want to give me a definition of shame?
How you feel about yourself?
Okay, so that's what it ultimately is. So it's your self-esteem, your self-image. So for complex trauma, it is feeling less than, not good enough, not lovable, not valuable, or inferior.
Some people might need more line paper to do. That's awesome.
So typically people can immediately connect with that definition. It just puts words to what they've always felt deep down about themselves. What I then do is potential possible exercises for them that we can do as a group. So the first one would be, if you were to draw a picture of yourself as a child when you were feeling shame, what picture would you draw? Anybody want to answer that?
Standing in the corner.
Standing in the corner, okay.
Head out.
Yeah, head bowed, so that
Hiding under the bed.
hiding under the bed is a common one. Yep, curled up. Many will talk about being in the fetus position.
Yeah.
Okay,
Crying.
crying. Yeah. Some will talk about fearful eyes. Can't look anybody in the eye, that kind of thing. one of the things that's interesting is some people will, I will ask, what color is your drawing? What color do you think most people will say? Black and white. So there's no color. So that's very important for them to begin to realize, wow, their world was black, gray, and white. It was without color. So then what I do with them is say, okay, now put words to this shame feeling. Help me understand it with words. So you've already given me some words, but throw in other words when you think of that feeling of shame.
Drawn.
Withdrawn.
Okay, I feel disgusting, worthless, hateful,
Right.
disrespected. I
Okay.
just feel ugly and dark and.
Right. Yeah. So some will use the word self-loathing or self-hatred, total disgust with themselves, all of the stuff you said, Ron. So what you can imagine is starting to happen is by people sharing, they're starting to fill out this picture that they've always felt and put words to it. And so people, often you'll find in the classroom it will get like deathly quiet because it's just like it's starting to hit, okay? So I then want to develop it for them, and what I do with that is basically to say every child that comes into the world doesn't know who they are. So their sense of identity comes from the outside, okay? So they come into the world asking fundamental questions. Who am I? Am I lovable? Do I have any value? And so then with those questions, and I make clear that all this happens at a subconscious level. The child is not aware that they're doing this, but they are. And so they're looking at the main people in their life to tell them who they are, if they're lovable. And so that can be what people say, but also what they do. Okay? So what I do is I do 3 mirrors. And so the basic metaphor is if we want to know who we are by what we look like, we look in the mirror. So a child is basically looking into a mirror and gets a reflection back from mom, dad, and 2 other mirrors that say this is who you are, okay? So the first mirror is family, and what's important is it is bound up not just with how your parents treat you, okay? So how they treat you, what they say to you, but it's also bound up in what your parents value. And that is bound up in what do your parents use as their definition for success or happiness, because that'll be what they value. Follow me so far? Okay, so the illustration I use just to help them get this picture in their head is we have in Winnipeg every year this, we call it the Red River Exhibition, and there's the House of Mirrors, if you've ever been to a House of Mirrors. So there's all these distorted mirrors. So I say, let's say you're 6 feet tall and thin, but you go into the House of Mirrors and you look in the mirror and you're 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide. Okay? So they get that. So I say, let's say growing up, you only had 1 mirror in your house and it was distorted. And so every day you look in the mirror and you're 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide. Every day you see that, you see that. And then one day you go to your friends with an accurate mirror and it says you're 6 feet tall and thin. What's going to go on in your head when you look at yourself in that mirror?
That one's disordered.
That's not me. That
I would
one's
think
mine.
I'm staying at my friend's house.
So they get that, okay? So that just helps them put a picture to, I gain my sense of who I am by looking at mirrors, and if you've got distorted mirrors, I'm going to think that's an accurate mirror and grow up with the beliefs I have around that, but they're very false. So then a lot of clients will say, oh, I've dealt with my shame. And so what I say to them is, okay, if somebody comes up to you and says, I really appreciate when you share, you've just got a big heart. what goes on in your head? They go, what does he want? He's just saying that to be nice, he doesn't know me, etc. And I said, what you just did is you discounted healthy mirrors. So what I then want them to understand is this. Shame is such a core belief that we build protective layers to protect that belief. So the first layer is, if somebody says anything that contradicts that core, it's a lie. Discount it. Don't even go there. And so if they begin to understand the layers of protective things they have around their shame belief, then they begin to realize how deep-seated it is. Okay? So, now comes to the more painful part for them. So we go into the treat. How do your parents treat you that would cause you to feel shame? So I just usually get them going with the 4 basic things of complex trauma. So abuse. So if a child is abused, they believe that they deserve it. And it's therefore their fault, and it says something about who they are. So I am being abused because I'm a bad person. I'm not good enough. If they're neglected, then their brain is saying, that's telling me that I'm not as important as my dad's work, as my mom's hobby. I don't have value. Okay, so all of that. Or if their brother was mom's favorite, then they feel all of the shame around it. So then we go into what kind of things produce the shame in a person. Because I want them to understand the causes of their shame so that they can begin to see how it still gets triggered today. So fire away with some of the causes of shame within a family system. And there's lots.
An alcoholic parent.
Right?
Because you have old group over and all of a sudden, oh no, I've got a problem here. He's come home from.
And that's where a connection between shame and feeling ashamed comes in. So if you are ashamed about bringing kids to your house because dad might be drunk, then you felt like your house was pretty messed up and you're part of that. And so you walk away with a shame feeling. Or if mom was always locked away in her room because of her depression or whatever, it was embarrassing to bring friends over to that. So you felt ashamed. And you'll get some of that too if you grew up in a poor family. And most of the kids in your school were middle-class families. Then you got this sense, I'm not good enough or I'm less than because I don't meet the standard. Okay?
Temperamental parent, they will fly off the handle.
Exactly. Yeah. So one day they're yelling at you and calling you names. Next day they're sweet and nice. So I ask clients regularly, if dad's drunk and he's crying into his beer, but he's saying, I love you so much, I love you so much. And then when he's sober, he's yelling at you and saying, you're a useless failure. Which one do you believe? Exactly. So if you get a mixed message, you always go with the negative message as the truthful one. Yeah. Okay? What other things?
Is it supposed to keep a secret?
Secrets, exactly. Huge one. So that tells the kid that we are messed up because we got to protect this. And then the flip side of that is the value of, if the family says we have to have this perfect image in public, but in private it's different, then you go, we're really messed up. We got to act out there. So that the image thing is another cause of shame with a lot of people. Okay? Another big one for most is criticism. So complex trauma families, characteristically, there's more criticism than praise. And in many families, there's zero praise or validation. Okay? But let me take this further. So if you go to your family's definition of success and value, so let's say mom is all about having the perfect body. And so she goes into being a mom and you're picking up that unless you have the perfect body, you're not good enough. And so you might be naturally a bit pudgy. So what do you grow up with your whole life? I'm not good enough because I don't have a perfect body. And then what can happen with that if there's sexual abuse is nothing tells a young person in louder terms that their main value is physical sexual, that all their value comes from their performance in bed or their looks. That sends a huge shame message because nothing else in me is any good, it's just my body. So that kind of abuse is big. Okay? How does a spoiled child pick up shame? Because they do.
Well, when everyone's doing everything for you, you can't, then you don't feel that.
Exactly. Yeah. Or, why doesn't anybody love me enough to say no to me when I know I'm not doing what's right? So that produces a shame. There's no boundaries, so nobody cares.
What does that look like on the triggering side?
If they're spoiled today, what we're going to look at is how we compensate for shame. And so one of the ways that you compensate is entitlement. So I now am owed everything because
I deserve that.
I deserve it. And that's a blend of the spoiled kid that now is,
So is the trigger then telling them they don't deserve it?
no, it's saying no to them.
Right.
Yeah. So the very thing they need now, they get triggered by. That make sense?
The light bulb.
And what's the key with that is if a lot of them, if you say no to them, they're gone. But some, if they hang around, they begin to realize that was actually done out of love, and it can lead to healing a lot of shame. Sadly, many don't hang around. You said, no, I hate you. Okay? Other shame-producing type of things.
What about conflict? If you create conflict?
And like
I can
being
remember-
part of it.
Yeah, being shamed in the sense that I was, too much of a disturbance as a kid.
Yes, yes. So, a couple things with that. So a lot of verbal things like you'll never amount to anything, can't do anything right, you're a failure, you're nothing but a pain. All of those things, you're just a big troublemaker.
You've met my father.
Do you want to know what I get when people come to react and they've never been exposed to anything around this? They come afterwards and goes, have you had a video camera in my house?
It
And I
seems
hear
like
that
it.
all the time. How did you get in my head? Oh, giant.
We're going to women's.
No, that's a shame happening.
Love you, Donna, no shame.
I have one, and I don't, and this is, like, I feel bad saying this, but I was ashamed of my mom, she smoked.
Yes.
I went to church and I remember a friend saying, oh, we always know when something came from your house, it smelled like cigarette smoke. I'm like, so washing everything twice
Yep.
and, putting it in plastic bags
Yep.
before I went out the door and,
Wow.
yeah, because
Yep.
you go sit in church and people are, yeah.
Yeah.
All those good Christians.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
The other part with that conflict is kids that grow up without stability end up with shame. Because they think maybe they're part of the conflict, the reason for the conflict. So if I was a better kid, maybe mom and dad wouldn't fight as much. So they take a lot of that responsibility, especially if dad says, I drink because you're such a bad kid type of thing. So there's lots of those subtle things that dads can say in anger or moms can say in anger that they may not even totally mean, but the kid takes it to heart. So comparison is another one. Why can't you be like your brother, etc. Those kind of things, or why can't you be like your cousin? Any others that you can
What
think of?
about bullying?
Bullying is a huge one.
Divorce.
So bullying can happen within families that remain hidden from parents. And you're gonna see a lot of that. So your big brother bullies and then don't tell anybody. If you tell mom and dad, and so the kid lives in fear of the older brother. Another one to be very aware of is pet names that the child feels hurt by, that are degrading in any way. A lot of families do what they think is fun teasing, but that can be very hurtful and cause a lot of shame. And you can get a lot of families that do a lot of practical joking with each other. And for a very sensitive kid, that can be very hurtful if they're kind of the brunt of a lot of jokes. So those are just very subtle things that sensitive kids can pick up on.
Something around, that should have from these, be sure your sins will find you
Right.
out as a child.
Yes.
Sorry, what was that?
Be sure your sins will find you out. Was often quoted.
Yeah, or be careful, little eyes, what you see, for the Father up above is looking down. That was supposed to make you love God, that just made me afraid of Him. So there's a lot of spiritual abuse that comes around God's watching you. I might not be able to see you, but He can, but it's got that overtone of, you better watch out. And so, if you're made to feel that God's perfect and you're never gonna match up at all, therefore you live with, I'm never good enough. And a part of that's biblical, but a part of that gets taken to a shame thing. There's another piece, and we call it shame-based parenting, and that's when parents say you should be ashamed of yourself, or I'm ashamed that what my friends are gonna think of me because of what you just did. And so they think if I shame the child, then that will motivate them to change. The reality is it makes them want to quit and give up, because it doesn't matter how much they improve, they still get shamed. And so there's not a resolution to it that they thought there would be by improving things. Okay? Somebody else had their hand up.
I was wondering about, like, if your parents divorced.
Yes. And so there's, again, a lot of kids internalize that maybe they were part of the problem. Yeah. And I've had clients who, parents in a moment of anger say, I wish you'd never been born. You've been nothing but, you broke your mother's heart over and all of that, and it just becomes overwhelming for them. So as you can imagine, just going through that list, people are starting to remember. Flashbacks are coming, and so it can really start to stir stuff up. So you don't want to just have them sit in that, but yet you want them to be kind of aware of that, because a lot of people begin to realize, I was shamed constantly, basically. I was in a shame-producing environment. One of the very interesting things to me, as far as, okay, so there's a couple other mirrors here. The next one is culture. So if you look at what does culture value as success, so just go to Hollywood. What does Hollywood present as the successful American? Perfect body, lots of money, good job, yeah, bling, lots of, a good job. So it's all measured by material. Okay? So you get that. So if you got a kid that's a little bit overweight but was loved by their family and accepted, but now they watch a Disney movie, not good enough. So you get that. Then you go to our education system, which is a wonderful system, but what's its standard for being successful? Brains, that's within the system, and then what's within the school? What makes you a popular kid?
Stars.
Right, so you gotta have brains, well, the nerds, or the jocks, or you have lots of money and bring your own car and give people rides and buy friends. So again, what I want clients to see is we live in a culture that reinforces shame if it's given in the home. And so now you're not just getting shame messages at home, but if you're a boy that learns by doing and by activity, and now you have to sit still in a desk and learn auditory, you're going to get C's and you're trying your best, but you're failing by the standard. So you're getting shame home, culture, and school. But then I like to take it further with them, and that goes like, we live in a culture where what is now a mark of success as a family is we're busy all the time. So we got our kids in all the sports, all the activities. So if you grew up in a family where parents couldn't afford that, and all your friends are talking about being in soccer and being in hockey, and you can't go into any of those, it's a shame message for a lot of kids. So there's very, very subtle things that just reinforce what had started here. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay. So that's the cause of shame, which is, it depends on the group. Sometimes they just want to keep talking about memories, and part of what they look for is validation. Was that a cause of shame? Is that legitimate? Am I reading too much into it, etc.? And so it can really become a time of a lot of sharing and people getting open. You'll get a lot of tears as people really start to connect with how they really feel deep down about themselves. And what's happening internally is, for the first time often in their life, they're bringing a subconscious part of them that they've stuffed down into the conscious world and getting honest about it. And it's a brand new experience, and it's very hard and powerful.
For me, I struggled because I'm kind of a perfectionist, so I would always be negative, but I never saw it as shame.
Exactly. Okay, so what I want to do now,
Is shame.
so what you have to realize is this. Family culture, basically they have a value system where there's a lot of things that are Christian, God's value system, but there's a lot of things now in our culture and families that value stuff that God says isn't important. So if you had a family with this extreme work ethic, what you will get with clients is they'll come into treatment and they'll go home to visit their parents and they say, you should be providing for your family. What are you doing being selfish at a treatment center? Your kids can't even afford to go on hockey. And they get all of that shame and they quit. Because, I got to go to be a dad and pull my weight and provide for my family. And that old value system drives them back before they're ready to go back. And so you'll get a lot of that kind of thing. One of the things that happens even in a day program treatment, in a residential program, the average client gains about a pound a week because you got all this food. And a lot haven't been eating well. And so they start to gain weight, and then they get all their fears come up, that guys won't like me now, nobody will be attracted to me. So I say they go on the Jenny Crack diet just to lose some weight. But that's a huge trigger for them. But they begin to realize how much their body image has been their main source of what gives them value. So what I do with them is to look at what gives you value. Now they won't really know. They'll know maybe what gave them value, but they know that doesn't work. So if you go to limbic brain, shame says, I want to feel better about myself. So what gives me value? I'm great in bed. I slept with more guys than anybody else, so that makes me better than everybody else. So they develop a value system that gets them instant validation. But in the long run, it leaves them empty. And they know that. So most of them are sitting there starting to say, what does give me value? Okay? Now there's another thing that happens. So when we have a child and our parents, so you have the same child, but you realize there's kind of two parts to them, okay? It's what they do and who they are. So their actions versus who they are. Does that make sense? So if a child does something wrong, you say, that was wrong, but I still love you.
Is that do?
Yeah, do, sorry. So you make a distinction and you say, I won't tolerate this, but I unconditionally love you. Okay? Now here's what happens in complex trauma. You did something wrong, so you were bad. So there's no distinction made. So if you do something wrong, you are not good enough. And so that then becomes a huge thing, because what happens now every time they fail? It feeds their shame. See, proves I'm a mess up, okay? Now the next thing we do is guilt versus shame. So shame or guilt is about what I do. It is an action. I do something wrong. God built me with a conscience that says you've stepped outside of healthy, you've stepped outside of loving. Now you're going to feel this guilt. And the desire of that pain, or the design of that pain, is to make you want to get back into healthy and doing the right thing again. So guilt is a beautiful system that when I do something outside of love, I feel it, so I'll get back and do something right. Shame is about who I am. So do you realize you can resolve guilt, you can't resolve shame to a person complex trauma? I can change my behaviors, but I can't change who I am. So there's no solution to shame for them. There's no way of resolving it. So that's why you got to stuff it down. Does that make sense? Okay. Now there's another piece to this guilt. And you can go a lot into this, but there's true guilt and false guilt. So true guilt is when you actually do something that is morally wrong. False guilt is when you're made to feel guilty for something you didn't do wrong. So dad says, I'm angry because you're such a bad kid. It's your fault that I'm so angry. And so the child goes around, whenever anybody's angry, I've done something wrong. And so that is false guilt. And most people in complex trauma have more false guilt than true guilt, because they've been blamed for stuff and told it's their fault, even though they haven't done anything wrong. But what you see is your parents have their extreme influence, power, to shape your conscience. And so now your conscience is shaped more by their definition of what makes you a bad person and what you did wrong. So now, every time somebody's sad, you go, oh, what did I do wrong? Why are they sad? And you get all upset with yourself that you must have failed. And that's false guilt. And so that's then what most will feel with. And there's no way of resolving false guilt. So what you have with shame and false guilt is two unresolvable, painful emotions. Any questions on that? Okay, anybody getting some stuff stirred up? Okay. You're okay?
Yep.
Okay. So let me just throw this to tie up the mirror thing, throw this in. So what people are going to hopefully begin to realize, if I'm going to have an accurate picture of who I am, I better get accurate mirrors in my life. And that becomes the God mirror, that becomes healthier people. But I have to put boundaries up with distorted mirrors. So if I hang around mom and dad too much, I'm going to go back to believing all the distortions. So I watch clients in treatment, and over each week you see their shame heal, and they're just like, they kind of like themselves again. And then they go visit mom and dad and they come back because mom said one thing and it brought everything back. And it is really, so what I tell clients is this: your growth in shame, healing from shame, is extremely fragile. It can break very easily in the early days. So you have to protect it with boundaries. And that's scary for them because they don't want to say no to some of these distorted mirrors in their life. Okay, another thing that I sometimes do, and I'm kind of just jumping here to different techniques and ideas that you can use. Sometimes I ask people, how many of you can look yourself in the eye in the mirror? And a lot of people say, I can't look at myself in the eye. So I can look in the mirror, but I look below my eyes, etc. And so that's quite an interesting thing when they can admit that they have trouble looking at themselves in the mirror. Some people, and this is where complex trauma becomes an important thing. A lot of people will have gone to self-esteem workshops, and they will say, just tell yourself you love you, or pass a mirror around, look in the mirror and say, I love you. And I say those things to clients, and I go, how many of you done that? Most of them done. I go, what went on in your head when you were looking in the mirror? I go, this is the dumbest thing in the world. Don't speak a word I'm saying, but I'll say it because they want me to. And so what I want them to see is, when you have complex trauma, looking into a mirror and saying, I love you, your shame's too deep for that to penetrate. And so that is not a viable solution to start with. And so that's just the extra difficulty that complex trauma brings when it comes to learn to accept and love yourself. Okay, so what I then do is to say how did they respond? And so what you can easily realize is that nobody wants to live with shame. Nobody wants to live with that feeling. And so what begins to happen is your brain is looking for a solution. And so basically it's saying, what will make me feel that I'm lovable, or what will make me feel that I have value? And then you begin to develop all kinds of different things to try and do that. So you went through with Kim and Britt the roles that children can take on, from the invisible child to the hero child, etc. What are other things that people will do to compensate for how they really feel about themselves? So you use one. If I'm perfect, people will love me and respect me. So you then become a perfectionist. Or with that, if I please everybody, then everybody will like me. So if I never set boundaries with people, never say no to people, never confront people, and so that then means I have to avoid conflict, because in conflict it might prove that I'm wrong, and that means I'm bad. So never go into conflict, okay? Other things.
Make people laugh.
Exactly. So I think what children do subconsciously is they look for who's popular at school. And they realize the funny people. So let's become funny. One of the things that I do, we do a Myers-Briggs personality test with clients, because it's a very important thing for them to start to understand who they are, how they're wired. And so there's the extrovert and the introvert, and so 80% of addicts are introverts. But what I say is, how many of you, when you grew up as an introvert, a shy, sensitive kid, felt that was inferior to an extrovert? Everybody's hand goes up. Extroverts are what you should be if you're healthy. And so for them to begin to accept that they're an introvert is a huge step, because everything in them says I have to be that outgoing, funny, life of the party type of person. Okay? Other things that people do.
Hide.
Hide, exactly. So, what I say to people is you can hide geographically, that's called isolation, or you can hide behind walls. And you can be outgoing, but nobody's going to really get to know the true you. I often say to people, clients, this, and they get it. Some people hide by never talking. Others hide by talking all the time but never saying anything. And so don't get tricked by people that just fill the air with words. Because it might be all from their head, never from their heart. Okay? Other. Compare.
Achievements?
Yes. So what usually happens is you go, what's my greatest ability? So I got a good body. Everybody's noticing my body. So I got a more beautiful body than every girl in school. So that's what gives me value. All my value is now dependent on my body. Okay? Others will say I'm smarter than everybody, or I got more money I can buy my friends, or I'm great at sports, or I have this talent, this ability, or I'm super funny. So you take your greatest strength, so I say you pick the arena of competition, which is your greatest strength, and then you compare everybody else, and they're all inferior.
I've heard people in addiction do this. Well, I just drink. I don't use drugs like that guy over there.
Okay, so yes, so within addiction, and you go, so a kid that can't compete on looks, etc., they say, I'll be the baddest of the bad. So I'm going to be a bad girl, bad boy, and that'll be my competition area. And then when you get in drugs, it's like, yeah, I smoke pot, at least I don't do crack. And the cracker says, well, I do crack, but at least I don't sell it. And then blah, 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 blah. And the seller says, at least I don't sell it to kids. So there's like a million different comparisons
All these things.
within addiction. And it's all an attempt to heal shame. I need to feel a bit better about myself. Now, here's the challenge that I want them to realize. I go, let's say you have a drop-dead gorgeous body, and then you hit 40.
Oh, yeah.
And gravity is starting to take its effect.
And then there's 50, and then there's 60.
Plastic surgery.
So I don't know if you have the terms out here, but we have cougar and puma. So a cougar is a woman over 50 that's still got it, that still can attract and win in the competition of body. And so a midlife crisis for many people is when my arena of competition, I can't compete there anymore. Okay? So then the next thing I do is, okay, if you go by comparing as to gain your value, can you ever totally relax and feel secure?
No.
No, because you always got something to prove. And so I say that when you always have something to prove, you're always insecure. Nothing to prove, you have nothing to lose, but if something to prove, you got always everything to lose. So they begin to realize that this comparison, again, gave them short term a sense of value, but in the long term, it doesn't work. And that's what I want them to realize. Okay, the next one that's really important for many people is codependency. So a very simple definition of codependency is shame. And what I mean by that is, I don't have any positive feelings towards myself. The only positive feelings I will ever have about myself is if somebody else gives them to me. So I need others to constantly validate me. Otherwise, I won't have any positive feelings within myself. So a bunch of ways for people to do that or understand that more. First one would be this. If I'm in a relationship, what does that prove? It proves I'm lovable. If I'm not in a relationship, what does that prove? I'm not lovable. So therefore, I must always be in a relationship to prove I'm lovable. And that's your relationship addict. Okay? Next thing is I will go around looking to rescue people who are needy. Because they will tell me how wonderful I am, I'd never make it without them, and I will be made to feel good about myself. And so, you get your rescuers. The problem is, what happens when they rescue somebody is they think that person's screwed up, they're inferior to me. And I'm superior to them. But if that person starts growing, and they're not growing, pretty soon, that person's superior to me. So what happens is, I want them healthy, but I need them sick. So I will knock them back down and rescue them again. Make sense? So what you'll find for a lot of people, so this is the inferior addict. So either the rescuer for them was their parents or their partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, who said, we get help, we'll help, we'll pay for it, just get help. And they get help. And the people always said, we don't have any problems, you're the one with the problems. And they start to pass them in maturity. And then they try to knock them back down and they go, I'm not going there. But then they realize a second issue. If I keep growing, I'm going to put greater and greater distance between me and them, and I'm going to lose them. And so what they will sometimes do is they will knock themselves down. They'll sabotage their recovery just so that they don't lose these people. Make sense? And that is super common, but it's, you see how it's a constant shame theme for both parties. So what happens here is you get the hero, helper, savior, but you then get the person who's constantly needy, because I'm always getting attention from all these heroes who want to rescue me. And they're telling me how I'm worth it and all of that, and they're investing in me and spending time in me. So I will be addicted to being needy because I keep getting attention. Questions? Okay. So the next thing that some people do, and we've talked about it, is go the image route. I can't clean up the inside, I'm a mess, I'm inferior, but I can make a real good outside. And people respect me for my achievements and how put together I am, but I'll never let them see the inside. And that includes all the masks that you talked about that people wear to hide all of that. Okay, the next one that comes out of shame is I need to be in control all the time. If I'm not in control, somebody might see a crack in my armor. Now, I want you to stop and notice something. You see that all of these are part of the 60 characteristics?
Yeah.
So you go back to the 60 characteristics, they're all characteristics of complex trauma, but they're also all characteristics of shame. And they're the attempt to compensate for shame.
So it's like a catch-22.
Exactly.
It's a double bind.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I want people to realize. To work on your complex trauma, you have to work on your shame. You can't find, there's no shortcut. You got to go through that
What
road.
was that you were saying about control? You need to have control.
Because if I'm not in control,
Oh, yeah.
somebody might see a crack. So then the other side is some people go to whatever. So another way to say it is you end up either super responsible, that's the perfectionist, or super irresponsible, don't try anything because you only fail anyways, so don't even bother. Or don't care about anything, just go whatever, nothing bothers me, it all rolls off me. The reality is, it doesn't roll off. You can act like you don't care, but you do, deep down. And that's, when people begin to admit that, then I go, okay, I think we're getting somewhere. They're starting to admit it was all an act. Okay, anything else that you can think of there? I'll give you a couple more. Intimacy addicts. Anybody know what that is? That's the person you meet them and they want to tell you their life story and go really deep in all their pain and stuff, and you just met them. And it's like they have this addiction to go to their deep pain, but it's all about them. As soon as you start sharing, their eyes glaze over. But they just want to go there because then they get you feeling sympathy and they feel good that they're able to talk about that stuff. So that can be a big one. And then there's fake intimacy. So shame means I'm afraid of intimacy. Because intimacy is where people will find out about me. So what can I do that gives the feelings of intimacy but isn't real intimacy? So for an example, bar room conversations. Everybody's hugging each other, laughing. The conversation goes 1 millimeter deep, but you feel close, okay? Soldiers in battle, you feel a camaraderie, a brotherhood of fighting, but it's all around one issue. Recovery, you feel close to people, but it's around one topic. So it's an intimacy that's based on one thing. Sports teams, the only time men hug each other and pat each other on the butt, when they score a goal and they feel so close to each other because you're competing for the same thing, but you don't share anything outside of that. So one night stands, that's all fake intimacy. You have the feelings of intimacy but not true intimacy. Porn is fake intimacy. You have the feelings of intimacy without a relationship to deal with. So all of those things are fake intimacy types of things. And most people will realize that they develop their style of feeling close to people without ever revealing the true them. Okay, questions on that? So then what I like to do with people is, there's some thinking stuff that goes on here. There's some emotional and action. And we'll get to that right after break. To me, and so it can be very shame-driven, protect.
And if I don't have perfect clothes and I don't look perfect, you know,
Yeah.
it's gotta be a certain,
I had a neighbor who did it with her house.
Right.
It was like very OCD in regards to the front of her entrance
Yes.
and her outfit.
So a lot of clients will say they're not OCD. And so I usually ask, when you put your canned soups and stuff in the cupboard, do you make sure the labels are all pointed out?
Yes.
That's not OCD.
It has to.
It's okay.
You just let it look.
If I can get them in the
How would
same
you know?
cupboard.
That's efficiency.
You don't want to see my cupboard.
There's an element that's common sense for people, efficient.
or if
But
you have
for
to be
others,
red-
it's,
red-
they have to just,
Yeah, no, I'm good.
others, and I'll say if you have different size bottles in the shower, do they get lined up tallest to smallest with the labels up?
I know somebody who had to eat all the red Fruit Loops first when he
Yes, that kind of thing. So that's an element.
drove his mom.
Another thing that people do who have a lot of shame is find fault with everybody else, then I'll feel better about myself. So they become very critical, and that's their way of building themselves up or proving their superiority. A big one is be very hard on yourself. So if you fail, beat yourself up so you'll never do that again. That's internal shame-based parenting. It didn't work on the child, but it does happen today. Another area just to be aware of, when we went to the compensation and comparison thing, as a way to compensate for your shame, you will get some clients who used Christianity or religion or spirituality as their way of being a better Christian than everybody else. And often they're attracted to legalistic churches that have lots of rules that measure spirituality. So women act a certain way, wear certain kind of clothes, etc., don't do this. And that proves they can do all of that well, that proves they're a better Christian than others. So that can be, for some, their arena of comparison. And then for some people, if you never want to get your shame exposed, never try anything new and don't change. Because if you change, you risk the chance of failing. And you risk the chance of having people see the real you. So there's a resistance or a fear of change or a fear of trying anything new that can come out of that. Okay, the vulnerability hangover. What you will find as clients open up for the first time about their shame is they will immediately feel good. I'm so glad I did it. And then they'll go home and go, I wonder what they thought of me. Oh, I bet you they're judging me. And they'll replay it 1,000 times in their head. And then they'll be afraid to come the next day because they're pretty sure everybody's judged them. So they regress into themselves quickly. So they put themselves out for the first time, taken that risk, exposed themselves, been vulnerable, and now there's a reaction to that afterwards that says, I did the wrong thing, pull back into yourself and hide again. And that's very common. And so part of what is in counseling that is just sometimes to initiate, I so appreciate what you shared yesterday, and validate them and get them talking about what they've been feeling. Don't know what
That was me.
Well, that sounds like an easy button. That's easy.
That was a road runner.
Okay, the next thing now is, so the self-awareness today. What I know as a counselor is there's probably hundreds of things that trigger shame today, but they are not even aware of the things that trigger their shame. But once their shame is triggered, it also triggers a whole list of fears, and then it sets a pattern in place. A whole bunch of thinking patterns take place, emotions that go along with the shame, and then a bunch of actions. So I want them to begin to understand how their shame works today. And the idea is this, is if they can catch themselves before the pattern gets too far developed, then they can realize it and get back on track. But if it gets too far along, they will isolate, they will relapse. That's how powerful shame can be. So, throw triggers today that might trigger shame.
People point out a fault.
Okay. Criticism or feedback of any kind almost. It can be positive feedback, or positive constructive criticism, but to the person it's, I still have a fault. They're seeing that I'm not good enough. Okay? Ignore it. Huge one. One of the ones that we didn't cover causes shame, but it's actually a huge one. So now you got to go back to that. Sorry. Many kids with shame were made to feel stupid. Anybody relate to that?
Oh, hello.
But there are hundreds of ways that being stupid was communicated to them. Rolling eyes, walking away while they're talking, contradicting them, telling them to shut up, all those kinds of things. So, if they are made to feel stupid in any way today, it's a huge trigger of shame.
I have one for that, for my own personal trigger, and when people say you're silly.
So, yeah.
Because my mom would be like, don't be so silly.
Yes.
And then people say, oh, you're so silly.
Yeah.
And then they laugh more and they say,
Yeah.
that's not.
And then you come home.
Yes, exactly.
So it's little comments that hurt you as a kid, is what I want you to see if you hear it today, okay? I was teaching on shame once, and I used the phrase that some kids were told they were pleasantly plump. So it was designed to build them up, but they just heard that you're fat. So I said pleasantly plump, and that the girl hadn't heard that since she was a kid, and it just brought back all this shame. It was quite something to watch. Okay?
Over questioning?
Over questioning, yeah.
So someone's over questioning you, or are you over questioning the situation?
They're over questioning you. So why are you doing that? Why this? Because that's saying I'm stupid.
Oh.
It's type of criticism,
Why did you
but
do
it's-
that?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is wrong with you?
What is wrong with you? So exasperation. If you feel somebody's exasperated with you, or if you feel that you're being a burden to people,
Oh, yeah.
so you're too needy. So even asking for help can trigger shame with some people. Or if somebody says no to you, that says I did something wrong.
It's also seen as sometimes forcing help.
Yes. Yeah. So you're being, people doing it out of obligation, not because they want to. Yeah. Or a lot of kids would have parents who would just that sigh. It's exasperated sigh. And if they hear anything like that today, they just personalize it.
Or a look,
I look.
like a,
Yeah, I always ask clients, what's your mom's look that sent shame to you? And it's the raised eyebrow, it's the little clucking noise, whatever. But there's something that as soon as mom does it, you feel this big. So what I want clients to realize, and I usually ask them, is when your shame gets triggered, how old and how big do you feel? And when shame is triggered, it takes you back to feeling like a child. And that's important for them to understand, because part of that child felt powerless. And so they're going to feel powerless today, but that's a lie now. They're not powerless. But they're going to feel that they're powerless. Okay? How about if you're texting or you're talking to somebody and all of a sudden they look at their phone because it lit up? Does that trigger shame? For many it does, because all of a sudden I must be boring because they're looking at their phone. Or I go, what kind of embarrassing things would bring shame? Doesn't take much for many people. Their zipper undone, stumbling, tripping, having food on their face, hair. Yeah. So any type of embarrassment, or if they see disappointment in people's eyes. So if somebody seems disappointed in me, huge shame. Failure is one of the biggest. Because what failure does is it brings guilt and shame together. So not only have I failed, I have a guilty conscience that proves how useless I am. So that's where guilt feeds shame. Okay?
Do some people tend to just, do kids go that way, like without there being a whole lot of traumatic influence?
Yeah, it's a good question. Here's what I've seen, and I can't prove it, but here's what I've seen. I ask clients this, because I had a client like this once, that their mom had only ever lost her temper once in her life. And it was at that child when she was really little. After that, whenever mom got a little bit agitated, the child saw anger. So from then on, every time mom was agitated, she just went into trauma, shock. So it often is there's one event in there that distorted how they perceived everything else after that. That makes sense? Please again. Good. Yeah, and I think some kids, it can come in a lot of ways, but they're just.
With our eldest son, he's constantly in a kind of a negative
Right.
tone. We know that, you know, my wife with depression, there is sometimes just mirroring
Yep.
these behaviors.
Yep.
And so there's this self-worth
Yep.
evaluation that seems like no matter how much we try and encourage
Right.
and reinforce the positive, that negative is remaining. So now this is giving me a new
Okay.
lens for.
So let me add a couple things that I've seen over the years. So sometimes the shame doesn't begin in the home, it begins at school or with friends. So they tease, they pick on, and then they come into the home and now they're in a shame place already, so they pick up shame. It's fascinating to me, so 10% of the population wets their bed as a child. But it's way higher than addicts. So I think it's up to about 20% of addicts wet their bed, but into their preteens. So it was a huge embarrassment, shame, they got punished for it, shamed for it. So just something like that can just start that whole engine going. Tough one to answer with kind of black and white stuff.
So just to add to that, or to ask about in addition to that, so we're looking at the 3 mirrors. So you've got family, you've got society, and you've got school. Can it be when you're, it doesn't have to always start at home. It could be 2 of the others,
Yep,
or 1,
exactly.
it could be a combination.
Exactly.
Because, because, you know, I can so see that, right?
Yeah. And I think what's, everybody who's a parent or who's worked in this field realizes is how much children pick up. So you could have a parent that never said anything unkind to the child, who acted interested in the child, but the child somehow senses that the parent's heart's not in it. They pick up the vibes, they pick up the deeper stuff, and it's hard to say how all of that affects the kid.
So they're probably more sensitive, you
Yes.
know, like if they're already at the point of saying, well, this is what I'm like in society, and therefore, because I'm looking at, let's say, kids that I work with that have, you know, eating disorders
Yep.
and things like that, right? So they're looking at the societal norm, and then they're looking at what's happening at school and trying to attract boyfriends or whatever's happening in there, and you've got bullying added onto that, and then, so they get into the home and maybe they're just hypersensitive to
Yes,
anything.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
Like another one I think is for a kid who's an introvert who doesn't naturally make friends very well,
Right,
and they don't fit in with all the cliques at school, they begin to feel something's wrong with me. It can be part of that. So again, just many, many different subtle things that play into all of that. Okay? Any other questions? Okay, so we can keep going on the triggers because there's lots and lots of them. But what I want them to begin to realize is that their own triggers. And then what I do with them is say, triggers have varying intensity. Some are super intense, they take you like, bang, you're just losing it, to others that are just not so intense. So which would be their most intense? So we didn't put it here, but disrespect is often one of the biggest. So then I go to, okay, once your shame is triggered, what fears then get triggered? So throw out some fears that get triggered now that your shame has been triggered. Okay, I'll get you going. Fear, you're going to be judged. Fear of abandonment. Now they've seen me. They're going to all leave me now. Fear I'm going to get hurt because I've made myself vulnerable. People have seen the real me. Okay? Fear of I'm going to be alone.
I know, fear of conflict.
Fear of conflict. Yeah. Fear of creating anger in other people. So this is where some people, when you get to their actions and their pattern, it eventually leads to what's the use. This is all this work and I still feel this way. And so you go to quite easily for people hopeless really fast. Why bother? I tried, but I've proven I'm a failure. I can't get it, etc. Okay? So there's a long list of fears, and what you'll find with most people, they'll immediately connect. When I feel shame, I immediately feel more anxiety. So my anxiety goes up as soon as my shame is triggered, and now I become very insecure. I wonder what people are thinking of me. I'm nervous to talk to people. I can't look people in the eye. All of those things start to kick in as soon as my shame goes up. So insecurities and anxiety become two big things. Okay? So then the pattern. So the thinking, there's a couple different things to do there. Number one, when shame is triggered, you tend to go obsessive. You replay the event over and over and over. You don't sleep because you're thinking what I should have said, what I should have done. All of those things are going over and over in your head, and then you start beating yourself up. You jerk, you loser. And what many people realize is they say to themselves the very same things mom and dad said to them. You'll never amount to anything. You're such a loser. You can't do anything right. And they'll just start playing those tapes. So I ask them, I call it, what is your negative thought loop? Now you have to remember the old days of 8-track tape sets where they just looped and looped and looped. And so your negative thought loop, it just starts playing in your head over and over and over and over.
Is this kind of like what I've referred to as playing resentment videos in your head?
Yes, yeah. Okay, and then the third thing I want them to see is what are the lies that you believe because of shame. So give me an example of some of the lies. You're not lovable. You'll never amount to anything.
You really are stupid.
You really are stupid. And so it's important for people to realize that what feels like the truth in that shame triggering moment, which is your limbic brain, it feels like the truth is actually a lie. And so part of the healing is learning to identify the lies and replacing them with the truth. And that is a monumental challenge, especially when your shame limbic part of your brain is fired up, because everything you feel feels like the truth. So the battle takes place in that, the lie truth piece. So there's 3 parts to the thought process that are all huge and are all very difficult to fight against. Okay? Then other emotions that go with it. So there's the hopelessness, there's the embarrassment, there's the self-hatred that kicks in, the anxiety and fear that are there, insecurity. Now you'll notice every emotion that goes with shame is a negative emotion. So it's not just shame that gets triggered, you're triggering a whole slew of negative emotions. And the reality that makes it difficult is that in the mind of the triggered shame person, there's no way of resolving any of those.
Which, doesn't that then lead to usually an angry emotion?
Exactly. So that's where a lot of people, their solution to shame is turn it into anger. Because then you won't feel the shame. And for some people with that, they will go to the thought of trying to blame this on somebody else. I'm feeling this because they are a jerk. They said this to me. And so that's where they begin to play the resentment tapes and the blame tapes.
Can people that are feeling they are lies or beating themselves up, they end up going into more
Yes.
depressive state versus
Exactly.
an angry?
Yes.
Yeah. Turned inward.
Oh,
So some people, shame ultimately leads to depression. Because who wants to live with the fact that I'm useless and not lovable? That's very depressing. So a lot of people do go to depression quite quickly. Some go via anger, but usually there's going to be a depression element. And they'll get very discouraged, just very downhearted as part of all of that. Yeah.
Is it more likely for somebody who doesn't act out the anger to actually get depressed? Depression is considered like turned inside anger.
That's only one definition of depression. So what I tell people is this. The reason anger becomes depression is you have an emotional gas tank and anger uses up all the fuel. There's nothing left in there in your emotional gas tank. So anything that comes along, you don't have anything to deal with it, so you get depressed. That's the outcome of an empty gas tank. So a person who's angry all the time takes a lot of emotional energy, and once that's gone, especially once the cortisol stops pumping, you're on zero. You're empty. Depression has other causes than just that, but that is definitely one of them. Okay? So, again, what I'm wanting people to see is this is all negative and lies. This is all negative, and there's a lot of emotional energy that is now being absorbed by all of these feelings that are there. Okay? And then actions. And this is usually the easiest one for them to get. So when your shame is triggered, what do you tend to do as far as activity?
Get busy.
Some need a distraction. So let's get busy, let's play video games, let's work so we don't feel. Some eat. Medicate, yeah. Let's numb. So what you're looking is somehow to resolve the feeling that you don't have healthy tools to resolve. And that basically means numb. So let's numb through activities, distractions, busyness, food. Some want to sleep, some isolate. Some want to go and have a relationship, sex, whatever, to distract them, to feel lovable again. So a lot of things that they did as a child when they felt shame, they will now be tempted to do again. They will get pulled into being perfect, people-pleasing, all of those different things that we talked about. Okay. So this is their self-awareness piece. And then what I want them to do with this is part of healing from shame is not never being triggered again. You will get triggered. You can't prevent that. That just happens. But what healing from shame means, I can now choose to respond in different ways. I can stop the lies and replace them with the truth. I can stop beating myself up. I can somehow find a way to turn my thoughts to other things, etc. And I can choose different actions. So I go back to the brain. So a child says, I'll stop beating myself up when I feel like I punish myself up enough. That's the limbic brain. The cortex brain says, I feel like beating myself up, but I know that's not going to solve anything, so I choose to stop. The limbic brain says, I'll stop beating myself up when I feel good about myself. So what you do in shame is this. You have to act your way to feeling. The limbic brain says you feel yourself and then act as you feel. Shame healing says, I feel like beating myself up, but I'm going to treat myself with kindness and respect and forgiveness. and I act my way into feeling better about myself. So the action comes before the feeling.
Can there be anxiety around that for
Oh,
some people though?
huge. Okay, so that's one of the things I really emphasize a lot, is everybody wants to, to heal from shame, but to heal from shame means taking a risk. And that brings fear and anxiety. And so you're requiring a courage that says, I'm going to choose to open up with safe people, even though everything in my limbic brain is full of fear. And says, don't do that. So as soon as you go to deal with shame, fear comes back in. And it says, what are you doing? This is a dumb idea. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get exposed. You're going to end up alone. And people usually very quickly see that shame means dealing with the fear, and it means taking a risk, which is, this is all a super scary process, is the bottom line. What is really good is if you have clients who've been around for a while, and they can say to the newer clients, it's worth it. It does get better. But one of the things that does come out is this. Those who've been around a while know that shame doesn't heal in a month. And they'll go, how long does it take to heal from shame? And so how I approach it is this. You can heal a lot from shame, but there'll probably be a part of you that will be dealing with shame for the rest of your life. You'll never totally be out of it. That's how deep it goes. But you can make progress and grow and grow and grow. But you can, like 20, 30 years down the road, still one day get something that triggers and all those feelings come back. And I have a client saying, I'm so tired of dealing with these triggers, when will they stop? And all I say to them is they'll get fewer and fewer, and they'll get less and less intense. And there is hope, but this is one of the longest journey parts of healing from complex trauma.
No, it sounds like it's a grieving process, how you're describing it.
Very good point. Yes. You guys are jumping to the healing part. Okay, let's go then. So one part of healing from shame is grief for sure, but it's a tricky grief because it goes like this. I'm grieving a childhood that I never had but should have had. So every kid should have loving parents and be unconditionally loved. I didn't get that, so I'm grieving something I never had, which doesn't make sense in a way, but it does make sense. And so when people realize, yeah, I'm grieving. Shame is really, shame is all about loss. Shame is losing something major, something that every child should get. And so for many, it goes to a very deep grieving time. Yeah. Another thing that's very common is some clients, and it's the power of mom and dad, some clients even in their 50s are still chasing mom and dad for validation. So they're still phoning them to say, I got promoted or I got a raise, and mom and dad go, and they get hurt all over again. Because if they never gave you validation before, they're not going to start now. And so I say you set yourself up to get wounded by continuing to do that. So there's a sense that you are grieving validation from mom and dad that you're never going to get. And it's a very painful loss to realize. And I think what you'll see with complex trauma clients is the power that God put into parents as far as influence over a child. It just absolutely blows your mind to see the power of a parent over a child. So scripturally, 3 or 4 times in the Bible it says that God will take the sins of the fathers to the next generations, to 3rd and 4th generations. I take that from a complex trauma understanding, and it's what God is saying is this. If you have parents who commit complex trauma, the power of the damage they do is so great it's going to take 3 or 4 generations to turn it around. that is how deep that influence goes. And so God is saying to parents in Deuteronomy 6 and in Exodus 20, take your job seriously. Because you are being entrusted with lives that you don't even begin to understand how much power you have to either destroy them and future generations or to bless them. And so when parents see that, again, they think of what they've done to their own kids and they go to guilt, which then goes to shame. But it's an important realization for them to see the power of a parent's influence. Scary, but.
Can I just tell a quick story? So my grandmother was quite a complex woman and had a really bad time with her children. So my dad is one of 7. So anyway, so she made some really strange parenting things, and not to go into detail. Anyway, so all the cousins, myself and my cousins, most of them in Scotland, all got together one time, and we've all made some questionable decisions in our lives. And every single one of us are divorced, you know, multiple times.
Yes.
Okay, so that's all of the cousins, and we all sat down one day and go, what is wrong with us? And we called it our calendar curse, and we sort of joked about it and whatever, but it's funny how, like, what could have happened. And then I was reading up on it and doing some research on it, and what might have happened, what we thought might have happened up there, and who knows what happened to my grandmother, would have been passed down to all of her children, and then passed down. So she would give away her kids. She gave away my dad and his brothers and sisters, and on a whim, to run off with a guy and then come back and get them. And this was at the turn of the century, right? So really bizarre.
We in Manitoba live with a residential school crisis.
Right.
And now we're in the 3rd generation. And the Aboriginal world is just almost at a point where they don't know what to do next because each generation's getting worse. So it's a huge crisis, but they see the power of the parents' influence on them.
And maybe just the realization, maybe some education around, you know, like the realization and an education and an awareness.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the start of the healing process.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So one thing to be aware of, so you get a child who's got complex trauma, who was abused, who was neglected, who has made a bunch of bad decisions in acting out their complex trauma. Now they're a parent, and they do not want their children to go down the same road as they did. So they become over-controlling, and then actually they create rebellion, and the kids go down the same road. So they create the very thing they're trying to prevent because of their fear, and that happens all the time in this world.
I know when I used to work for a police department, there was a case that came up, and it was sexual abuse of children in this one family, and I know the officers had managed to trace it back several generations.
Yeah. So as they say, abusers end up abusing,
Yes.
Or abused people end up abusing, and in the sexual abuse world, physical abuse world, etc. Any other questions on that stuff? You're all looking like wrung out dish rags.
I missed some parts, so maybe you already touched on things, or maybe it's coming up later. Do you explain the difference between shame and guilt?
Yeah, that was.
It was what
So where I go next, and we'll just cover this quickly and then take a break, and then I'll pull some of the healing stuff together. What I want people to then realize is, how does shame affect other things in life? So I go, how does shame affect a relationship? So it affects it that you're not sure you can talk about every topic with your person because they might judge you. So it affects intimacy, communication. For some, it even affects their sex life because they're not sure they're desirable. So that can be a thing. It definitely affects conflict. So what happens in complex trauma is that if there's conflict or an argument, there's going to be a winner and a loser. That's the only way it works. And if you lose, you will get more shame and more pain. So they come into a conflict now as an adult in a marriage, and they get in a conflict and they go, oh, winner loser, I'm not going to lose. So I will win no matter how dirty I have to fight, because I will not lose, or I'll probably lose anyway, so don't ever get in a conflict. Avoid, keep the peace no matter what, never rock the boat. All of that becomes part of how that affects, and that basically destroys relationships. Some, when they get into a conflict, you're starting to get to what the real issue is, and they deflect to something else. Well, you're one to talk, look at that, you do this. And you try to get the attention onto something else besides what's the issue. And so conflict with shame people seldom gets resolved. And it only creates more baggage and more triggers. So it does affect that. And then I get them to think about, how does it affect how you raise your kids? And it does affect that. And so it's important for them to begin to see how they might be passing shame along already to their kids. And so sometimes they'll want to talk about that a lot as they get realizations. But you always have to be aware of just kind of the guilt that's going to go along with those realizations, because it will happen. And then the big one for most people is shame-based people don't set healthy boundaries. They're afraid to say no. So what a shame-based person does to set boundaries is either isolate, that way I don't have to deal with people, or I'll use anger and I'll blow everybody away. So that's the only tools they have to set a boundary is anger or isolation. And so they realize in recovery, if they don't start learning how to set boundaries, they're never going to make it. And that means they better start dealing with their shame. So part of what I do with that is you have to be able to respect yourself enough to stand up for yourself. To say that you matter enough to put some boundaries in place. And so really when they see that healing from shame means respecting myself and standing up for myself, then they can get a backbone to set some boundaries. So what's happening with all of that, I hope you're seeing, is they begin to realize shame is tied to everything. It's tied to boundaries, it's tied to parenting, it's tied to conflict, it's tied to relationships and intimacy. And they go, oh, it affects everything negatively. So this becomes more and more of a priority to begin to deal with. Questions?
When we talk about boundaries, I get like anxiety.
Exactly.
It just freaks me right out. A couple of people have told me, like, I say, my mom's coming, she puts me down for all this stuff, and she's always doing all this stuff, like, even to this day, she's still, like, I can call her and I can tell if I have to hang up right away or if I can talk to her. Like, she doesn't even, all she has to be is hello. And just the way she says it, I instantly, I'm like, okay, actually, I just want to see how you're doing, I have to go, and then I hang up because it just freaks me out. And people tell me, like, you got to make boundaries with your mom, and when people start saying that, like, I feel like crying or just instant panic attack. Just scares me just hearing that word is freaking me out right now.
So we're gonna do a whole 2 days on boundaries because it's such a big thing. So we do a whole week on it, but that's a very normal thing. So part of what you said I think is important. So a shame-based child who's been hurt and given all these painful messages, they develop this sophisticated radar system. Where as soon as they walk in, they sense mom's mood, they sense everything, they just pick up all the vibes, they sense if mom's a bit depressed, mom's a bit angry, and so they have the sophisticated system to know when this is not a safe time or a safe place or a safe person. And that's huge for people in recovery in this sense. Their kids know when they're heading to relapse before they do. Does that make sense to you? Because their kids know what are the warning signs mom's not in a good place. Oh, she didn't put her makeup on today. She always puts her makeup on. And they get fear. And their fear of abandonment, fear that they're going to relapse, fear that they're going to be they don't matter, they couldn't fix mom this time, more shame comes out of that. But they learn thousands of different things to look for that mom's not in a good place. After I taught on shame one day, a client came and he said, you just triggered a memory. When my dad got home from work, he always put his keys on the dryer when he came in the door. And I could tell by the force he put his keys down on the dryer what kind of mood he was in. He just picked it right up. And that just brought all that memory back. And so that's that walking on eggshells, always alert, always on guard. And all of that feeds you.
Just had a thought, like, Jeanette, when you said that, when some people said we need to set boundaries, like right away I thought, oh, I feel so ashamed, I can't do that, I'm such a loser. They've almost compounds the shame.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I can't set boundaries after 42 years, what I do.
Right.
You start thinking,
Okay,
it's crazy.
so let me say part of this beat self up is shame-based people, some develop I shoulds. They live by I shoulds. I should be able to do that by now. I should be able. And if I can't, then I'm a failure. So it brings shame. And there's a lot of Christians that live by I shoulds. And that can be very detrimental for people because they're always beating themselves up because they never measure up because they set an unrealistic expectation. So with that, beating yourself up is the unrealistic expectations we set of ourselves. So what we actually do is shame is a monster that has to be fed. So we set unrealistic expectations of ourselves, so we always fail. So we just keep feeding the shame. And it keeps the whole cycle going in a sad way, but it's what happens.
My family, my sisters, we always say, well, don't should me. Because we've got, we have the talk, but,
Yeah.
that's something that we need to.
Exactly. Okay, let's have a quick break and then we'll wrap up the healing part and I'll throw in a couple Bible stories.
The shame monster, the walking wounded.
One of the things that I wanted to say around the shame when we talk about the shoulds, this is a huge issue for older clients. Because what they realize is they stopped acquiring tools when they were 8, 10, 12, and now they're 50. And they get down on themselves that they're now learning what a child learns. And they should have known this. They should have been figured it out. And they can get super down on themselves and super depressed. It's something just to be alert to, but they will go through that. Okay, what I did is I just wrote the 13 steps as far as healing from shame, just so you could get them, see them all on the board. Some will take longer to cover than others. Some we've already talked about. So identifying the lies with the truth. So Romans 12:2, transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's really an important piece with shame. And when Paul talked about fight the good fight of faith, part of faith is intellectual faith. Will I keep believing lies or will I choose to believe truth? And Paul is saying it's a fight, it's a war. And so we have to understand that because this is not some little switch that people flip and say, okay, I believe the truth now. They've got all of that limbic brain that pulls them towards lies when it's triggered, so it is a war. This one is huge. Don't beat yourself up. Treat yourself with respect even when you don't feel it. And so that's, again, you act your way to feel. And that's very important for people to get. And then we talked about having boundaries with distorted mirrors, but starting to get healthier mirrors in your life. Now, one of the biggest questions that will come out almost every week is how do we find healthy people? And there's no doubt that is a dilemma in our culture today. Sadly, there's a lot of unhealthy people in churches, and so it's not the safest place sometimes for people, but you want them to then have the tools to find out what is the criteria you use to whether a person's healthy or not, or safe or not. and we'll spend time on that later, because it's a big issue. In fact, next week, Kim and Britt will be covering some of that. Gonna come back to the healthy mirrors, because for many people, the only guaranteed accurate mirror is God, or their higher power. Let me just say one thing. We've been talking about mommy-daddy issues. And this is just something that you can use at times, but I've done this with clients. What kind of dad do you wish you had? Describe it. And they'll say fair, forgiving, consistent, trustworthy, and I just start writing them down. And then they go, that's God. They just describe God. So that's an interesting way for them to realize they're craving that perfect father. And so that's one way to get there. I ask people to learn about themselves. So part of being okay with who you are is finding out who you are. What are your skills? What are your talents? So if they've been in shutdown mode, survival mode, and in addictive lifestyles for years, they probably don't have any hobbies. They don't have a clue what they're good at. They've just done what they could to get some more drugs. And so part of that self-discovery and learning your strengths, learning your passions, learning what you're good at. Okay, I'm going to stop there and jump up to here, because this is a huge one, because there's 3 parts. So the solution to shame isn't that you turn around and love yourself. The solution to shame is that you accept yourself. And that gets tricky, because what parts do I accept? So do I accept that I'm 100 pounds overweight, or do I go on a diet? So how I do it is say your personality is something you're born with and it never changes. So you're an introvert or an extrovert. You're highly analytical or you're not. You're artistic, creative, or you're very logical, matter of fact. You're very spontaneous or you're very highly organized things to do list. So those you're not going to change about yourself. That's how you were wired. So accept that. And that's important, because some people go, oh, I forget stuff, or I'm a bit ditzy, and I get so down on myself that I'm that way. And I go, that's the part of you have to learn to accept. You can develop ways to try to help with that, but you need to accept that. And a big one is just accepting that you're shy and sensitive. And so one of the things I'm thankful for, because I'm shy and sensitive, is that they can see that I accept that about myself, and that it can actually be a good thing. Because in their mind, that's just a bad thing. So coming to accept yourself is important. So one of the things I do just with clients is I say, everybody fold their hand. Okay, so fold your hand. How many is your left thumbs on top? So studies show 50% of people put their left thumb on top and 50% put their right thumb on top. So what I say is left thumb on top right and right thumb wrong? No, it's just different. So in their mind, they don't think it's just different. They think one's right, one's wrong. So they need to understand extroversion is just different from introversion. There's not one that's right and the other's wrong. So they like that little exercise. So I say, okay, when you turn on the tap, do you use your dominant hand or your non-dominant hand? How many? Dominant hand. Non-dominant.
Daughter goes.
What you're holding in your hand.
Okay, so let's say the outside tap.
Okay.
Outside the house.
Then I left. Well, I'm confused, because I only write with my left, but everything, depending on the sport, I use various,
Phil Nichols.
which is basically, I think I'm confused.
Okay? And then you can use screwing the top off a jar. The same thing. So again, it's just ways of illustrating it's just different. And so quit looking at your characteristic as inferior, it's just different. And then Kim and I are polar opposites in a lot of ways. And people love having Kim around because they realize that we actually complete each other. So that her strengths complete some of my weaknesses, my strengths complete some of her weaknesses, and they see that we're better as a team than separate. And so they can begin to realize, okay, two very different people actually strengthen each other and make it better. So those are all things that just help them begin to accept who they are. The second piece with that is figuring out what parts of me should I change and what shouldn't I. So should I get braces? Should I get a diet, or do I just accept that? And that gets tricky, because some people can go on diets for the rest of their life and they're not going to get to that Hollywood body shape. And so they have to accept kind of their basic structure. So those are the kind of things that there's a gray area that they have to be okay with figuring out for themselves. Then the next one is accepting your past. And so most people go through, as they learn about complex trauma, they get really angry about their past. And they get really depressed about their past. But at some point they have to come to accept their past is their past. They can't go back and relive it. And so, will they allow it to make them bitter or better, is what I say. And so that becomes their decision. And so what I tell people about this is you can't, your parents are responsible partly for how you turned out. But you're also responsible for how you are today. And so you have to accept your part in what you are and how you respond to the wounds that you receive from your parents. That part you can control. But that's really hard for people to accept. I've had clients come to me and say that they have a resentment against my children. I go, what? You don't even know my kids. Yeah, because you were a better dad to them than my dad was to me. So I'm resenting them. So that's part of how the resentment can go towards their past, is they get angry at anybody that has a good life. Okay, and then the third thing they got to accept is the process. So the example that I find helps them the most is what you do with the child when they're crawling is you accept that they're crawling, but you don't accept it at the same time, because you want them to walk someday. And so when the child takes its first steps, you celebrate, but then they fall on their face, and you don't go, shame on you, I'm disappointed in you. You go, get back up, get back up. And so what they realize is that learning to walk is marked by failure. So that we learn and grow through failure. That's part of the process. And so you accept where you are in your recovery, but that doesn't mean to say, okay, I'm going to stay here for the rest of my life and never change. I accept, but don't accept it at the same time. I accept where I am in the process, but I want to keep growing. And so that's kind of that internal tension that you have to live with. And the process is slow. And that's very difficult because we all want to get better now. And so for people to realize and accept that I got to work at this every day for the rest of my life is a very important part that they have to accept. So you can use different illustrations with that, from a person who's recovering from a major leg wound and has to learn to walk again, or a stroke and has to learn to walk again, and just the determination necessary, but it's worth it when they learn it. So those kind of examples that give them a perspective that gives hope is very important. So that acceptance for a lot of people is huge. And so part of what we see with complex trauma is it brings you to a place where you no longer have a relationship with yourself that is loving. And so what you're doing is changing that. And you're saying, I now will choose to have a relationship with myself that is marked by grace and love. One of the things that is very important for people, I think, is this. Some people want to beat themselves up for how they responded to their complex trauma when they were young. And what I say to them is this: stop beating yourself up. You were trying to survive. You don't blame a child who has no tools except fight, flight, or freeze for trying to survive. So don't keep beating yourself about those decisions. Start focusing on changing them now. And that's really your only option. Okay. We talked about the grieving part, we've done the self-awareness part. This one is really insignificant, is what gives me value. So we talked about 2 days ago, most people are human doers, not human beings. So if I'm not doing something, I have no value. My value comes from what I do, money in my bank, all of that stuff. And so they have to realize that there's value. So I use 2 illustrations just to get them thinking. I say if you use your standard of value and apply it to a newborn baby, that baby has 0 value in your standard. Because they can't go out and get a job, they can't pay bills, all they do is eat your money and make a mess and dirty their diapers and cry and keep you up at night. So they don't have value by your success, but yet you value them. What is it that gives that baby value? So they don't have to do anything, but they have value. So what I do with people is, biblically I don't tell them this, but there's 3 types of value, okay? So one is there's inherent value. We are made in the image of God. So we don't put farmers in prison for killing a pig or a cow, but we put people in prison for killing a human, because humans have a value beyond an animal. That's kind of inherent in us. So we don't have to do anything, we have value. And I use the same, let's say your dad has dementia, Alzheimer's, they can do nothing, but you still value them. They have value just because they're alive. Okay, so then there's a second type of value, and that's the value of the badge. So the illustration is you could have a corrupt cop, but you still respect them because they wear a badge. So the position of authority brings with it a respect. So when God says to honor your parents, He is definitely talking about this. But the third type is earn because of character. So this is the easiest type of respect to give to somebody, is they've earned it. They've proven to be trustworthy, to have integrity. And so it's easy to honor our parents when they've earned it and they have the authority. The challenge is when they're jerks, but they're still our parents. And so that's the dilemma for most people in complex trauma. And so that verse in the Bible, honor your parents, I think churches have done a lot of damage by saying, give them all this honor as if they were noble saints. All I am told to give is give them the respect of the badge. I can set boundaries with them. I can cut them out of my life. That is not being disrespectful because they haven't earned that respect. And so to help them make that distinction becomes very important. So 2 things that I want them to understand is this. Something causes us to have value just because we're alive. And then there's a character piece. So the more character I develop, the better I feel about myself. And so keep working at growing character, and that will help you heal from shame. Any questions on that? Okay. Inner child work. Let me just say one more thing about the value system. For a lot of people to develop a new value system, they have to let go of an old value system. So that means they have to put in all their attention on their body, or flirting as their way of gaining value, or one-night stands. All of those things they got to give up if they want to develop. So that's part of what I mean. Stop the behaviors that you've done in your old value system that only create more shame. They might give you an instant gratification, but they only create more shame. And so for a lot of people, that's super tough. So I get a client, let's say, that always just flirted and got attention from men. And she says, I'm going to stop that. Because I know I hate it. I like the attention, but it all turns sexual and I hate it. I hate it. I'm going to stop. And then they stop flirting and nobody pays them any attention. And then fear takes over. Oh, I'll never be in a relationship. Nobody will want me. I better start flirting again. And so that's a bit of the dilemma that they will go through when they start to let go of that old system. Inner child this isn't a magic trick or anything, it's just trying to put words to the reality that there's a part of you that's been rejected that hasn't grown up. So there's no necessarily right way of doing it. I find that 95% of my clients, as soon as I say inner child, they connect to something. They feel that inside of them. And so what a lot think is, oh, I'll just go start taking care of my inner child. And I go, how have you treated that child for the last 40 years? I've shunned them, locked them away, embarrassed by that part of me, hated that part of me. And I go, now you're going to show up and say, hey, let's go out and play. They don't trust you. So you got to take this very, very slowly. And so there's a bunch of different things people can do. So one is you journal by using your dominant hand and your non-dominant hand. So your dominant hand, you would write to your inner child, how are you today? And then you would answer in your non-dominant hand, which would be like a child writing. It looks kind of like a child writing. And you don't spend a lot of time kind of overthinking it, but it's amazing, people just start getting these responses that they start writing about. And so for a lot of people that's hokey, but for many you just see some stuff begin to happen. And some do inner child theophostic prayer or inner child prayer healing, where they go back with Jesus to that inner child, and that is a huge source of healing for many. And what can happen with that is memories can start to come back. And so gradually healing can spread into that. One of the things that's really important, I think, is that shame, the solution to shame is humility. Now that just immediately feels wrong to a person with shame. Because to them, humility feels like humiliation. And what's humiliation? You get put down, you get shamed, you get made fun of. You're humiliated. So they think if I humble myself, I will be humiliated. And so it's really an important thing to begin to understand what true humility is. Now this is where some negative, bad church teaching is humility. For some people is taught you never congratulate yourself, you never acknowledge your strengths, you think of yourself as less than everybody. And I go, the true definition of humility is you see yourself like God sees you. You see yourself accurately, your strengths and your weaknesses, and you're able to do that. Pride is seeing myself inaccurately. It is either seeing myself as better than others or less than others, and then focusing on how I'm less than others, but getting the attention on me. And so humility is a foreign, brand new concept for people, but when they realize that humility is seeing myself honestly, accepting myself, and taking the risk of opening up to others, then shame heals. And so when they can make that connection, it's really, really big. So part of what I want clients to see is this. There's a thought process, you got to change your thinking. There's an attitude process, you got to have the right attitudes. And there's activities that you can do, and there's a spiritual part and a relationship part. So you can't heal shame in isolation. You need people. You need a spiritual component. You need physical activities, emotional activities, spiritual activities. It's an all-encompassing healing journey that people need to have. Okay? Then deal with guilt, because guilt feeds shame. And then take the risk to start opening up. And what people find is once they think of starting to open up about their shame and about some of their wounds, everything in them wants to pull inward. I can't go there, it's too scary. But if they do, then they feel, nobody judged me. People came to me and say, I know exactly what you're feeling, and they get validated and they get encouraged, and then the healing can begin. So there needs to be a opening up, a communication, letting down the walls. So part of what I emphasize with people is make sure it's a safe person. Most abusive relationships, the girl opened up to the guy about everything and then he later used it against her. And so they've all had that experience and it scares them to death. So before they open up, they better check, is this a safe person? And then once they open up, the healing goes to a new level for people.
Can you explain dealing with the guilt a little?
So one of the big triggers of shame is guilt. So if I do something, let's say I tell a lie, and my conscience is bugging me, but I don't want to deal with it, it's feeding shame. Because I'm going, I'm a loser, I can't do that. And the longer I stay with a guilty conscience, the worse I feel about myself. So basically it means you got to keep a clean conscience. Okay? Any questions on that? So this goes to 9:30, right?
Yes.
So we got half an hour. Okay, can I tell you some stories from the Bible?
Oh, please do.
Okay, so the first story. So when Jesus chose his disciples, he went to Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And where were they? They were fishing. Who were they fishing with?
With parents.
Their dad's businesses, okay? And what did Jesus say to them?
Come and follow me.
Follow me. Okay, what is fascinating when you look at the whole Jewish school system is that just takes the understanding to a whole new level. So here's what happened in the Jewish education system. So you go to school and you had to memorize the Pentateuch. So that's the first 5 books, Genesis to Deuteronomy. If you're a good student, you memorize the whole Old Testament. That was part of schooling. And then when you're ready to graduate, the top rabbis of the country would come into the schools and they would find the best students. And they would go up to that student and say, follow me. And what that meant was, you are now going to become my apprentice and you're going to know, I want you to get to know everything I know and become my character, like me. So that was the calling. And that went to the top students. And then after that, the other students go, okay, what do we do? So they then would go out to other rabbis and say, would you let me follow you? And they would offer themselves as a disciple of all the different people. And so a bunch more would get snatched up. So guess what would happen to the rejects that nobody wanted?
Fishermen.
They went to their father's business. So when Jesus said, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, follow me, guess who he was talking to? The ones nobody else wanted, the rejects. And so that to me is a beautiful story for healing shame. Is because God specializes in rejects. Okay, so let me give you a couple things about that. See if you remember it. In Matthew 12, Matthew gives us a summary of the Messiah's ministry. And he says, I have not come to cry aloud or argue in the streets. I have come to bring justice. And then he says this, that a bruised reed he won't crush, and smoldering flax he won't snuff out. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Mm-hmm. So that was significant because what the Jewish religious leaders said is, if they're messed up, have nothing to do with them. We were only going to work with good people. Okay? So in that culture, a bruised reed, again, would carry volumes of meaning to people because it was a shepherd's term. So what happened for a little shepherd boy is he had all these sheep to watch all day and it was boring, very boring. So he would go to the ditches, and all the ditches are full of these reeds. And they were so plentiful you couldn't sell them in a market because you could go cut one out. So he'd cut out a reed and then he'd make a little flute. And then he'd play his flute, which was a reed flute. But what would happen as he's playing it is the saliva from his mouth would begin to break down the reed, and pretty soon it wasn't playable anymore. So what would he do? Would he work on it to try to refit it? No, the reeds are everywhere. There's millions of them. Throw it out, crush it, and cut out another reed. And then, when you had a lantern, an oil lantern, at that point in time, your wick was flax straw. And flax straw, again, was so plentiful everywhere because they made linen from it and all of that. And so you couldn't sell it, it was that plentiful. So you put it in, and then once it started to sputter, you didn't try to trim the wick, you just threw it out and put another piece of flax straw in. So the point was this, I think you get the point. What does God do with people, and there's billions of them, that are no longer any useful? Does he crush them? Does he throw them out? And what his point is this, no. God does not crush bruised reeds. He takes them and refurbishes them and makes them so they can play a beautiful tune again. And God doesn't take smoldering flax straw and crush it. He works it so that it can shine light again. So that is, to me, another beautiful thing that says this is what you can identify Jesus by, how he treated broken things, how he treated broken people. So he doesn't take shame people and crush them. He works with them to bring healing so they're useful again. Okay, isn't that neat? Okay, a couple other, well, I'll keep going until we're run out of time.
Could I ask what verse that was?
Matthew 12, I think it's 18 to 20. My old brain, all that used to stick, but it doesn't as well anymore. This one's fascinating me, so I got to do it in a couple parts. So Jesus' baptism, he comes out of the water, and then what happens next? The dove comes, and then what happens?
The voice of the Lord.
Saying,
"This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased."
okay, now, what is really important to understand is that was the words of a father at a bar mitzvah. So a bar mitzvah was when a Jewish boy turned 12 or 13 when the dad considered that they were now a man. And he would have a public ceremony, and they still have them, and they're a huge celebration event. And he would bring his son and say, "This is my beloved son, I am proud of him." And he would present him to the world as the son that he is proud of. So that was the bar mitzvah ceremony. What is the next piece with this? It goes like this. You realize that if a child was considered a bastard child, they weren't allowed a bar mitzvah. What was Jesus considered?
A bastard child.
Exactly. So it's very, very likely he didn't get a bar mitzvah. But God gave him one and he's 30. Okay, so let me take that further, because here's the connection to shame. The Roman world, they didn't do a bar mitzvah. They did an adoption ceremony. And it wasn't that you adopted a child into a family. It didn't mean that, though it could have that part. But what it meant was you presented your son to the world as your son that you were proud of. So Ephesians 1, Galatians 2, what does it say God does with us? He adopted us. So what he is saying is the bar mitzvah, this is my kid. This is the one I'm proud of. So I think for people with shame to realize they've been adopted, not just brought into God's family, but that he's proud of them, the way they are with all their flaws, has a huge healing element. Okay. Next verse, Isaiah 49. So it goes like this. Can a mother forget her nursing child? Are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. And so what he is saying is, the mother's love is the strongest love in the world. But he goes on to say that some mothers will forget their nursing child. So even though it's the strongest love, not every mother is going to have that love. Okay? But then he goes on and he says, but I have loved you. And then he says, I have tattooed you, or I have imprinted or engraved you in the palm of my hand. Remember that? Okay, that means very little to us today. So I have to kind of give you the background. So when we have our kids that we're proud of, we have a picture and we put it on our fridge, we put it on our office wall, it's in our wallet, we're displaying it, and we take it on trips so we can look at it and remember our kids, right? You didn't have photographs at that point. So what people would do is they would tattoo mom, like we do today, right? But the idea was, why tattoo it to a spot you can hardly see? What would be the place on your body that you would see more frequently than any other place? No, because it's a farming culture. So you're working constantly with grain, with animals. Guess what you're looking at all day? The palm of your hand. So you got the picture of your kids. For a man that's got this tattoo. So again, as God, what I love about the Old Testament is God does these word pictures that show His love for us. And that's significant because, yep, last time we talked about trust is a big issue. The second issue that clients have a huge time is understanding unconditional love because they've never experienced it. And then what comes with that is understanding that God loves them. They can get it in their head, but they don't feel it. And so I find the metaphors, the pictures of the Bible, sometimes help them feel some of that love. So when they see kind of God tattooed me where He would see me the most, because that's how much I mean to Him, for some people that just kind of connects somewhere deep inside and brings some healing to that. Okay, next one. Woman at the well, John 4. What can you tell me about the woman at the well?
She had many husbands.
Okay, remember how many?
5.
Okay, and the one she was living with was not her husband, so 6 men in her life. Okay? What time did she go to the well?
Noon.
Midday.
Nobody else.
Any significance in that?
It's the hottest point of the day.
Okay, that's why nobody went to the well. They went to the well first thing in the morning. So what does that say about why would she go to the...
Shame.
There you go. Everybody talked about her behind her back. People looked at her with that sneer, that condemnation in their eyes. So the only safe time she'd go to the well is at noonday. Now there's a couple things about what Jesus does, which are to me fascinating. So what does He say to her? Give me a drink, and then if you were to ask me for the water I have, you would never thirst again. And what is He trying to do is take her out of... So remember the 12 needs, the physical needs? All the physical needs connect to both an emotional need and a spiritual need. So we have physical thirst, but we have emotional thirst, and we have a spiritual thirst. See that? We have physical thing of sex, which is deepest intimacy. We have an emotional need for deep intimacy, and we have a spiritual need for deep intimacy. So every physical need was designed to be a sign saying, don't stop here, you got to go to the emotional and spiritual world as well. So what He says to her is, she thinks she's talking about physical thirst. And what does He say? You got 5 husbands, or had 5 husbands. He says, you have a thirst that goes beyond physical. And I can satisfy that thirst. So He is saying, you're trying to fill your thirst with men. You're trying to fill your thirst by a relationship, and it's not working. So let me help you understand what that thirst is about. So Jesus takes her very pressing problem of why are my relationships not working? Why can't I find a man that will love me? And He's saying there's a deeper part to that. There's a spiritual and emotional thirst and longing that will never be met in the physical relationship world. Okay? So He does that with her, and He does it in a beautiful, beautiful way to bring her to see all of that. The next thing is this. So where's the woman at the well? Where did she live?
She was a Samaritan.
Okay, Samaria. So in the Jewish world, so Jewish Israel, there was northern Israel, there was southern Israel, Judah, and northern Israel, Galilee. In the middle was Samaria. So Jews did this. They said, God, every morning a Jewish man prayed, I'm thankful I'm not a woman. Okay, so that's just what Jews did. And secondly, they taught that God used Samaritans to feed the fire of hell. So if a Jew had to go from southern Israel to northern Israel, they would never go through Samaria. They would cross the Jordan River, go up the east side and back in. So what Jesus says is, I must go through Samaria. In other words, what he is saying is, I don't care what the Jewish people are saying. This is one of God's people here that he loves. And I'm going to go against all the religious persecution and backlash I'm going to get for doing this, because somebody needs God. And so that is, God was willing to go through a whole bunch of opposition and negative comments and criticism in order to reach a deeply shamed person. Okay? Everybody okay? Just trying to think of how much I keep going here.
Interestingly, because she was a Samaritan, talking to him as a rabbi, she would have been petrified that he would have cursed her or cast judgments on her.
Yeah.
So
And that
her
was her
shame
fear.
level was probably like
Exactly.
triggered.
Yeah. One of the things I've seen with clients is that people that have worked in the sex trade, there's a level of shame there that goes deeper than pretty well anybody else. And so that woman would have had some of that. Yeah. Okay, Matthew 8. So Jesus in Matthew 5 to 7 gives the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 8 comes down from the mount. Do you remember the first thing he did when he came down from the mount? A leper came up to him. Okay? So what were the laws around if you were a leper?
Just cry out.
Unclean.
Okay, so you had to live away from the people, and if you ever were around people, you covered your mouth and yelled, unclean, unclean, so people would stay away. Okay? So what would happen with the leper? So you have to kind of picture this leper, and this is, you're just using your imagination, but for some period of time, could be months, could be years and years, he's not had human contact. He's not had a hug. He's not had any physical closeness to people. That's been forbidden. He's lived in isolation. Okay? So Jesus, this guy comes to Jesus, and what is fascinating, do you know what he did when the guy said, please heal me? He touched him. So Jesus could have just said, you're healed, and kept his hands in his pocket. But he said there's not just a physical healing necessary, there's an emotional healing necessary. And the only way I can heal that is to hug him. And he touched him. So that is another beautiful example that Jesus goes right against cultural protocol and says this guy needs that to heal at a deep level, and I will give it. Okay, can I give you one final thing? Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Okay, here's what I want you to go home and think of it through new eyes. Sheep are like children and complex trauma people. So if you look at the characteristics of complex trauma and the characteristics of children and then study sheep, you'll find they're all the same. So the point is, sheep can't survive without a shepherd. They're the only animal in the whole world that can't defend itself. So they don't have sharp teeth or sharp claws, and they can't run fast, and they can't find their own food. So they're one of the stupidest creatures. They will continue to chomp away at food until they've eaten roots and all and basically destroyed their pasture land. So they need a shepherd because they have no self-protection. And because of that, they live in constant fear. Fear is, and so that whole Psalm 23 is written about sheep who are in fear and what do they need. And so sheep basically live out of the limbic brain. And they make all their decisions about the limbic brain. So number one, sheep will not eat or lie down if there's any conflict in the group, if there's any predators around, or if there's any parasites bugging them. So they won't eat or lie down unless they're perfectly feeling safe and content. So what does he say? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. In other words, he takes the fear away so that I can relax. and he provides the best food, green pastures. It went so far that sheep will not drink from a stream because the water's moving and it spooks them. They're afraid of moving water. So what does it say in the next verse? He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside
Still waters.
So if there was a stream, what a shepherd would do is he'd put rocks across the stream to make a dam, and then the sheep would drink from the silent part of the rocks, and they'd have still waters. So what he's saying is this shepherd knows your fear and your needs so much that he does what is necessary to help your fear go away. Okay? Then the next one I love. It says he restores my soul. Anybody remember Psalm 42 and 43? David writes, "Why are you cast down, O my soul?" So what happened with sheep was if they were on a bit of a slope and they went to lie down and they laid down their back towards there and they flipped up with their feet up, they wouldn't be able to get up if they haven't been sheared. Their wool would be so heavy, they'd be stuck with their feet flailing in the air. They would be so afraid and so anxious that they would die within a half an hour if they stayed there. And so what that was called when they did that, that was called the sheep is cast down. So it's a shepherding term. So a cast down sheep is a sheep that is upside down, they can't fix it, so they're overcome with fear and hopelessness, and they give up. So what does David say in Psalm 42? Why are you cast down on my soul? The shepherd brings the sheep up, and he brings them out of that cast down place. So it's dealing with, the shepherd doesn't just deal with physical needs, food and water, he deals with emotional needs when you're cast down. When you're discouraged, hopeless, giving up, depressed, he's there for you. Pretty neat when you start looking at your complex trauma. Okay, so he guides me in the right path. Then, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you're with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So, the dark valley, there's 2 times when you would have to go through a dark valley. So you would start in one field in the summer, and then as the summer progressed, water moves downhill, so the green grass is lower and lower. So eventually the only green grass is in a dark valley. Okay? Earlier in the season you would finish this mountain range, and then the next pasture land is on this mountain range. To get from one mountain to another, you had to go through a valley. Okay? So the fear that they would feel in the valley would be so much. So it says, my rod and my staff, they comfort me. So the long staff, what a shepherd would do with a very, very timid sheep is while they're walking through the valley, the sheep couldn't see the shepherd, it was too dark, but he'd hold the side of his staff against their side. So they would know he was there. They couldn't see him, but they could feel him. And so that was God's kind of giving the sheep what it needs when it was full of fear in the dark valley. But there's a second thing that's an important piece with this. There's a sense in which it's in the valley that he does restore my soul. So if a sheep lived on a mountaintop all the time, it'd be a great view, it'd be very exciting. It'd be high. You realize nothing grows on a mountaintop? You can't feed souls on mountaintops. You don't grow people up on mountaintops, you grow them up in valleys. So it's in the valley that we get our souls fed and restored and healed. So that's a powerful thing with the sheep. And then it says, prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. So again, new pasture land, sheep were stupid, so if they stepped in a hole, a gopher hole, and broke a leg, if there was snakes around, that would freak them out and they wouldn't be able to eat. So a shepherd, before they moved to a new pasture land, he would go in and he'd get rid of all the holes, check for any wild animals and snakes and all of that, and prepare the table before them. And then, at the end of the day, He would bring them in, this is, so the staff he used in the valley, then he had his rod, and that was his, kind of his billy club. What he would do is Jesus said that I'm the good shepherd, and then my fold he talked about, I'm the door of the sheep. So at night he would build a fold that was made out of rocks with a small opening, and then he would lay across it. And he was the door of that fold. So no predator could get to his sheep unless they went through him. But as the sheep were coming in at night, the shepherd took his rod and he did a little ritual with them. He would stop and look at each sheep and he would tap them to count them, number one, to make sure they're all there. But then he would check their fur, because sheep were very subject to a parasite that went into the ears. And it would kill them or it would drive them crazy. It would be so painful. And so he would go and he would check, and if he found the parasite, guess what he did? He anointed their head with oil. And that got rid of the parasites. But in that time, when he's checking them out, he's talking to them. How was your day, Sally? Did you have a good day? And he's getting to know the sheep, and they're knowing his voice. And so part of his involvement was not just leading a large group, it was one-on-one contact, one-on-one. Intimate involvement with them was all part of that. So that's Psalm 23. Now I gotta give you one more thing, and then we'll be done. Have any of you read A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23, Philip Keller? Okay, so Philip Keller was from BC, but he was raised in Africa to missionary parents, and he was a shepherd boy. So much of what I've shared, I've got from Philip Keller. He writes a book looking at Psalm 23 from the eyes of a shepherd, and it's fascinating. But one of the things that happened is that you would have the sheep who always thought the grass was greener on the other side of the fence. And so they wouldn't follow you. They were the stubborn, rebellious, defiant sheep. And you could kind of discipline it, and it still would stray and wander off. So the shepherd faced a real dilemma. What do I do about this sheep? So break its leg. So that seems cruel, but what he would do is he'd break the sheep's leg and splint it, and then while the leg was healing for the next 4 weeks, he'd carry that sheep on his shoulders every day from morning to night. And guess what? It got to know the shepherd. It got to know his voice, his gentleness, his love. And once the leg was healed and he put it down, that sheep never strayed again. It stayed really close to the shepherd because it now fell in love with the shepherd. And so what I tell clients all the time is, guess what addiction is? It's God breaking your leg. And they get that. And they immediately go, well, yeah, because then I was forced to really stay close to him. And I found out he was a loving shepherd. And so what I tell people is this. We're like sheep. We can't survive on our own. And that's David's point. We need a shepherd. And I said, you get to choose your shepherd. And you've chosen a lot of bad shepherds, but if you look at Psalm 23 and you look at the qualifications of this shepherd, that's a pretty awesome shepherd. And so he's one that's fully trustworthy. There you go. See you Saturday or